Okay, there we go. It's 10 o'clock and we're about to start this webinar on this Human Rights Day. We will wait just a few seconds before we kick off properly, just to allow people to join us if they're transitioning between meetings or so. But a warm welcome to everyone who's here already, and we'll get started in a second. I can see that a lot of people are coming into the meeting. Warm welcome to you. We'll be starting in a short bit, just letting some people arrive before we kick off. Okay, I think we should get started. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this Human Rights Day. We're here today to discuss how businesses can and must navigate their work to support human rights, even and perhaps especially in turbulent times. It's really encouraging to see that so many of you are joining us and that so many of you are interested in the topic of advancing action on human rights. This is an open webinar for all, so a warm welcome to both our Global Compact members and non-members. My name is Kirti Lekfet, and I lead the UN Global Compact Network Sweden's work on social sustainability and human rights. The UN Global Compact is the United Nations Sustainability Initiative. We were founded 25 years ago, and we are now the world's largest sustainability network with businesses for businesses with over 20,000 member companies worldwide. Today, we will be exploring how businesses can navigate human rights in turbulent times and how they can not only meet their responsibilities to respect human rights, but to do so in ways that are human-centered, build resilience, and deliver meaningful outcomes for people, even when the world around us is shifting quickly. And we're having this conversation because we're living through a time of overlapping global crises, what many describe as polycrises, ranging from geopolitical tensions and armed conflict to widening inequalities, rapid technological disruptions, climate impacts, economic instability, and growing ESG pushback. And in all of this, people, and especially those most vulnerable, risk becoming invisible. Groups such as migrant workers, young people, indigenous peoples, LGBTI plus persons, and persons with disability often face disproportionate risks, and too often they are the first ones to be affected, but the last ones to be seen. And in times like these, it's important to remember that we do have a global standard to guide us. The UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights remain the key reference point for understanding how companies should identify and address risks to rights holders, even when the operating conditions are uncertain or rapidly changing. At the end of the day, businesses are made by people for people, and we need to keep people at the center and focus on action. And these crises shouldn't slow down progress on human rights, but rather they show us why this work is so important. We're joined today by three fantastic speakers who each bring a different perspective from government, legal practice, and business on how to move from principles to practical action, even in challenging contexts. First up, we have Ulrika Lyckman Alnered, who's Deputy Director at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs. And we have Sarah Hoskins, who's the Chief Sustainability at Mannheimer Swartling. And we have Frances West, who is the Social Sustainability Director at Tetra Pak. Each speaker will have some time to introduce themselves and share some of their work on the topic, and we will then move to a joint discussion and some questions. And during this webinar, you're welcome to use the chat function to share your thoughts, insights, or reflections, if you wish to do so. And if you have any questions for our panelists, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, which will be turned on throughout the webinar. And we will try to get to those towards the end of the session. But with this said, I'll turn to you first, Ulrika, to kick us off with your presentation.
Many thanks, Kirsti and the UN Global Compact Sweden for inviting us all to this year's Human Rights Day. And good morning, good day, good afternoon. I don't know where you all come from. My name is Ulrika, and I work as Deputy Director in the Sustainable Business team at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs. The team leads on the UN Guiding Principles, but also on the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises on responsible business conduct, including the Secretariat of the National Contact Point. And we also oversee the OECD Convention on Bribery. We are part of the internal consultation within the ministries on all EU legislations for sustainability, but other ministries lead on those legislations. But however, I participate as an expert in the public inquiry to implement the EU due diligence directive into Swedish law. And just a note, as we know, just this week, the EU Parliament and the Council came to a provisional agreement on the EU due diligence directive and the sustainability reporting directive. Sweden has a clear commitment on sustainable business. For more than 20 years, we have had an ambassador for sustainable business, or CSR. We work through advocacy on sustainable business in a collaboration, so-called Team Sweden approach. It means that governmental agencies like the Business Promotion Agency, Business Sweden, the Export Credit Agency, and the Swedish International Development Agency, SIDA, are cooperating to fulfill their part of sustainability, risk assessment, and due diligence. The government instructs these agencies to favor sustainable business, including the respect for human rights. The Swedish government also works actively to support companies in their efforts to reinforce both the OECD guidelines and the UN Guiding Principles, and to facilitate for Swedish business abroad and to fulfill the guidelines. Business Sweden has set up regional sustainable centers in 5 locations around the world, in Bogota, New Delhi, Nairobi, Manila, and Bangkok. And for 15 years, there is also a CSR center at the embassy in Beijing. The aim of these centers is to build capacity, networks, and partnerships, and to strategically promote responsible business. They offer support to Swedish companies to conduct business in challenging markets. Next slide, please. We have a strategy for trade, investment, and global competitiveness, and this also includes sustainable business. Our Swedish state-owned enterprises operate on market conditions, but their state ownership policy is set by the Ministry of Finance. And the systematic work with sustainability has increased their focus on due diligence in supply chains. Sweden also supports developing countries through, for example, UNDP, in their efforts to develop national action plans for business and human rights. Furthermore, we support the Team Europe initiative on sustainability in global value chains, as well as the Ethical Trading Initiative Sweden. And we are a long-time core funder of Frontline Defenders engaging in safety and protection for human rights defenders. We have also set up a help desk open for Swedish companies, and this help desk is based in Stockholm, working in the Swedish companies working in low and middle income countries, where the Swedish Export Promotion Agency, Business Sweden, provides practical advice on responsible business conduct. Next slide, please. Next year, we will also celebrate OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises on responsible business conduct. Its anniversary, 50th anniversary. The updated OECD guidelines from 2023 now cover a broad range of areas such as environmental issues, human rights, corruption, and employment. Add the UN Guiding Principles, both non-binding in nature but relevant as soft law. Swedish multinationals that we talk to don't want to backtrack on efforts and investments they have done on increased sustainability reporting and due diligence, but want to contribute to economic, environmental, and social progress and minimize adverse impacts on matters covered by these guidelines. Let me conclude by an example in the Team Sweden spirit. The International Council of Swedish Industry, a member-based NGO, is partly funded by the government. They engage in the mining sector in challenging markets, where due diligence and business and human rights is key, and where the broader stakeholder dialogue with communities and mining associations is crucial for a sustainable business. Partnerships increase leverage, efforts on human rights due diligence is a collaboration between public and private sector and actors striving towards the same goal. Many thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Ulrika. That's really interesting and a compelling presentation about the role of the Swedish government in supporting businesses both at home and abroad. And governments play an important role in due diligence work. Thank you. We'll hand over to Sarah to take the floor.
Thank you, Kirti and Ulrika, for kicking us off. As Kirti said, my name is Sarah Hoskins and I'm Chief Sustainability Officer at Mannheimer Swartling. I'm based in Stockholm in Sweden, but as you might be able to hear, I'm originally from the UK. And in my current role, I coordinate our strategic sustainability work internally, but also in support of clients externally. Although I am a lawyer by background, it's my colleagues in our practice groups that are doing the advisory work at the sharp end. And what I've tried to do today is to bring together some themes from the UN Forum in Geneva, which happened a couple of weeks ago. I was meant to be there and I broke an ankle, but I joined online and I've sort of tried to squeeze that together with my own reflections and experiences over the last few months. So what I realized, however, is that when you gather 4,000 people together for an event like the UN Forum, you are inevitably going to get lots of different perspectives that don't always align with each other. You'll hear something in one room and then something else in another room and then something else on LinkedIn afterwards. And that's not so strange. You're bringing together a broad range of countries and perspectives and also corners of this area, which would include also people like me. I'm more of a sustainability generalist, but need to be more than conversant on the business and human rights front in order to be able to bring in the specialists who keep the sort of integrity and space of this area intact. So we can very briefly touch on the next slide here, which captures the points that Kirti brought up in the introduction. These are turbulent times. It's almost become trite now to talk of regulatory fragmentation, pushback, geopolitical upheaval. We are, I think, if you're dialing in to this webinar, more than aware of how that plays out in practice and how it impacts how we do our jobs. We are being squeezed on various fronts. And there's no getting away from that. But if we don't spend too much time looking at the detail of this, but instead move into what does that actually mean for us? If you move to the next slide, we can see, again, something which I don't want us to linger too long on because we can very much get lost in the sauce on this. But I wanted to show it briefly to give a snapshot of some of the legislation or draft legislation coming through from the EU. And it's not a bad thing that there's a lot of it, but it does have a consequence, a practical challenge. And because I've been asked to look at this area from a legal and compliance perspective, if you are coming into this space from a legal and compliance team, say, you have a lot to process and a lot to work out. And I don't even mention it on here anything to do with the digital compliance field, which also have human rights and climate touch points. So in short, as you can see from the orange, there is both legislation in flux. There's also lots of stuff that's been around for a long time. We have touched briefly on the omnibus. If we move on, though, to complexity and what to do about it, I would say that one of the things that I took from the forum in particular, but also just generally, is the need to avoid freezing, don't get lost, and avoid what I've called dud diligence here, which isn't a typo, but just don't create a process which does nothing but create a process. It doesn't actually lead to any results. You can see a couple of quotes here on the left. Your eyes can rest on them, but I think the analysis paralysis, this sort of complexity complex, which is talked about, where you just gather a lot of data, you don't necessarily do anything with it. I think that is something that we need to be able to work better with. The omnibus maze, it doesn't help, but the thing I would say is just follow the progress and timing. There has been a big step this week, so we should be able to see clarity soon there, for better or for worse. A lot of stuff is unchanged in terms of other legislation, and don't let the omnibus be the reason that you fail to see the actual risk that needs to be managed. So if we move to the next slide, I have picked up the theme of coordination, because given that complexity, the only real way through is together. And that is, it's a truism to say what is noted in the quote on the right here, that we're not always speaking the same languages, literally and metaphorically, in our organizations. And we need to find better ways of working out how to work together internally, but also externally. And there are various reports which I've noted at the bottom of these slides, which came out at or were promoted in some way at the UN Forum. And this GBI report on what good looks like is interesting in that it pulls out that theme of the need to find synergies, and where you have legal instruments which have led to a due diligence process being put in place, you may be able to piggyback on some of the existing processes and not build from the start. And also just this idea of working cross-departmentally and making sure that you have the same understanding of what you're even doing, bearing in mind that if you're from the finance team, you do not have the same lingo as the sustainability team, the legal and compliance team, and so on. And then the external picture shouldn't be forgotten too in terms of networks, collective action, looking outward, looking at what your sector is doing and trying to find smart ways forward. Here is a quote from one of the panelists in Geneva where Anna mentioned trying to find more efficient ways to share data or more standardized ways to request it. Together we can work a lot of this out. And then it's moving to the final theme that I wanted to draw out, which is communication. And I mean communication here, not so much purely as an external comms point, but rather that if we are moving through complexity in turbulent times from a legal and compliance perspective, we need to understand what our framework is and what our lever is. And what I've written here is the importance of distinguishing between wrapping and content. What I mean is, this came out in the topic discussed at the forum about the business case debate. Do we use it enough? Are we using it too much? Does it matter? There's a report on this, which is interesting. But I think what is reasonable is that you understand what it is that is driving an action. And that is not to say that you shouldn't reach beyond compliance, but you should understand what your compliance baseline is to know what the ambition level looks like, to understand whether it's legal requirements, soft law, internal policy, stakeholder expectation, identified impact, which is driving you to need to take action, and then consider carefully how you gain traction for that. What are your levers? It may be the business case, and use that knowledge to push forward and through. And I think we're breaking down what you need to do and have to do and want to do, and maybe taking into account this quote here from Clara Serva, which says the most sensitive organ in the body is often the wallet, may be worth bearing in mind. And I'll stop there, having tried to squeeze quite a lot into quite little time, and hand back over to Kirti.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was really comprehensive, and really useful to bring up the framing of things as well, and really understanding what are the levers, the business case versus the human case as well, and how they tie into each other. Thank you so much. I really look forward to exploring more about this in the discussion. I'll hand over to our final speaker, last but certainly not least, Francis West. Floor is yours.
Thanks very much, everyone, for your time and attention. My name is Francis West. I am Director of Social Sustainability at Tetra Pak. We're a food production and packaging solutions company, and we aim to make food safe and available everywhere. So I was asked to talk about human rights due diligence in practice, and so I'm going to do that by focusing on one group of affected stakeholders, waste pickers in the collection value chains of recycled materials. So this is an example of integrating human rights and environmental action, which I think is increasingly important in the context that's been set out. So if we go to the next slide, please. So look, we commit to the guiding principles on business and human rights, and as such, the scope of our human rights due diligence is across the value chain. So when we're identifying impacts, we think about our affected stakeholder groups within our own operations, including contingent workforce. In our packaging supply chain, we look at the extended value chain of each material, as we do for our equipment and services supply chains. Then downstream, we focus on workers in collection and recycling value chains. So Tetra Pak works globally to support collection, sorting, and recycling of our packages. And in many countries that lack formal collection infrastructure, that means that we depend on informal waste collection workers, waste pickers. Now, as you all know, the guiding principles, they guide us to prioritize our energy, focus, and resources where the impacts on human rights are most severe. And it is very clear that when you take that lens of severity, you will soon arrive at waste pickers, given the huge array of challenges that they face. And of course, those include low incomes, very low incomes, potentially hazardous work, lack of access to social security, sometimes children accompanying their parents to work, just to name just a few. So if we go to the next slide, please. Important to note, of course, that none of those impacts are relevant for only one company. These are things that are not occurring in the collection and recycling value chain just of Tetra Pak or of any particular food company. These are clearly issues that are connected with socioeconomic conditions in certain countries. And while that doesn't mean that companies can turn away from their responsibility, it does mean that to take effective action, we have to work together in partnership, and that chimes with some of the messages coming from Ulrika's presentation as well. So in recognition of that fact, Nestle, Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, Unilever, and the NGO Tear Fund came together to establish the Fair Circularity Initiative. This has a singular focus. It's to respect the human rights of informal waste collection workers. Now, really important to note that the president of the International Alliance of Waste Pickers, so the international union essentially of waste pickers, sits on the steering group of the Fair Circularity Initiative. So that really reflects the importance of having waste pickers or their representatives consulted in company decision-making on matters that affect them. So the first action that the Fair Circularity Initiative took was to establish the Fair Circularity Principles. They're publicly available. They translate the guiding principles to collection and recycling value chains. And the second piece of work that the FCI has focused on is on advocating for the inclusion of the informal sector in countries that are developing extended producer responsibility regulations. So this is really addressing the enabling environment, the operating context. And doing that, I think, particularly in this context, trying to, play a role in shaping the operating context is part of good due diligence. So if we go to the next slide, please. So in terms of implementing these principles, the Fair Circularity Principles, we have another key partner. It's the Circulate Initiative's Responsible Sourcing Initiative. So what the Circulate Initiative have done is taken the Fair Circularity Principles, and they have now created a responsible sourcing framework for companies buying recycled materials. And we're applying that framework in a project in Bangalore in India, together with our key recycling partner Deluxe, and in partnership with PepsiCo, who also have a relationship with Deluxe. So again, this partnership point is resonating. So this is a 3-year project, and it reflects the concepts that the guiding principles embody. So it starts by assessing the impacts on the workers in Deluxe, the recyclers' value chain. We do that by interviewing workers at each stage of that value chain. So we're not just looking at first tier, we're looking right down to the bottom of the value chain. There's a consistent attempt to involve and empower the people that are affected. So in this case, the Indian Alliance of Waste Pickers are part of the advisory committee that makes decisions on this project. They're part of the group that prioritizes the most severe impacts and develops action plans to remediate those impacts over several years. And beyond that role of the Indian Alliance as a credible proxy in this project, the TCI, the Circulate Initiative, has even held workshops with waste pickers themselves to get input into the action plans that have been developed. We've also committed to consulting with waste pickers at the end of the project to gauge the impact. And then there's also this kind of crucial recognition within this project that to deal with these systemic issues, different actors have mutual responsibilities. So Tetra Pak, PepsiCo, Deluxe, the aggregators in this value chain, so on, we've all got a responsibility to act, but those actions might look a little bit different depending on where we sit in the value chain. Look, hopefully that's given you some insight into one example of how we're undertaking human rights due diligence. And if we go to the next slide, I'm just going to zoom back out again and reflect on the context. And I think it's easy to be pessimistic, right? But I think we've got to remember that this work has always been tough. And we're really trying to change the way that business gets done right across value chains. We're putting, people's dignity and equality at the heart of decision making, and that's not simple. I think it's also, right to remember that for affected stakeholders, for people like the waste pickers in India or the sugarcane farmers in Brazil or migrant cleaners in any number of countries, it's always a time of crisis, right? These global developments are important, but they really don't take away from the fundamentals of the global standards on human rights. The guiding principles were developed to drive better outcomes for those most in need in the midst of a complex world. So I would say within that context, double down on the core elements of quality, human rights due diligence, full value chain responsibility, applying a risk-based approach within that value chain, so driving resources towards the groups of people that are most in need. Engagement with affected stakeholders that enriches your overarching approach. It brings nuance to your understanding of risk. It helps tailor your solutions to those most in need and allows you to test the efficacies of those actions. Invest in the partnerships that can drive impact, continue to apply those international human rights standards beyond local law, and really look for opportunities to integrate human rights considerations into climate and broader environmental work, which is, of course, often more mature in companies. And I think that quality approach will bring value, perhaps not short-term financial returns, but value in terms of customer recognition, regulatory preparedness, employee motivation and retention, and supply chain resilience. So I guess my overarching message is don't get distracted from your mission by all of this noise. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francis, and thank you all for your presentations and for sharing so generously. I will start by posing a few questions to the panel, and Ulrika, Francis, and Sarah, you're very welcome to build on each other's reflections, of course. And a short reminder that we do welcome questions from the audience, so if you have any, please use the Q&A function. But I'll start with asking you, Ulrika, and this is tying into what Sarah was speaking about. She mentioned the Business and Human Rights Forum, which was held in Geneva at the end of November. This is the United Nations Business and Human Rights Forum, and this year it was precisely on the topic of accelerating action on human rights amid crises and transformations. And this is the world's largest forum for the topic of business human rights with representatives and stakeholders from all over the world. So I'm wondering, Ulrika, I know you were there as well. What key lessons or insights or trends stood out to you, and why do you think they matter to companies at this moment?
Thank you, Kirti. No, it was really interesting to be participating in the forum, and one insight or reflection is that more companies were participating in the panels, which is really good. And a lot of lessons were shared on stage. I also could see the collaborative effort that I was mentioning. Also, the discussions in different panels. For example, there was one panel on mining in Colombia, where there was I mean, they might have had different ways to think about the issues, because there are issues to reach, for example, the green transition. It will affect people, and as was said this morning, you need to take into account the stakeholder and have a dialogue. So this was really message throughout the forum, the multi-stakeholder dialogue, and reaching out to the people that are most effective, human right wise or climate wise or so. So yeah, I could speak more, but I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. And of course, you mentioned the help desks that you have, the CSR help desks in China, for example, and you have hubs in Manila and Beijing and Bangkok, you said. How would you say that the MFA, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, ensures direct engagement with local stakeholders and rights holders to inform the work that you do in these areas?
Thank you. No, so for the centers, the CSR center in Beijing, that's within the embassy, but others are driven by the Business Sweden in our offices. And I mean, so we provide advice, practical advice to businesses. We don't get engaged directly if there is an issue with a company issue, so to speak, but we can provide guidance on the UN Guiding Principles, the OECD guidelines, and so forth. Of course, here in Stockholm, in our office here, when we speak about the national action point for the OECD guidelines, we also have a multi-stakeholder dialogue twice a year, but that's on another topic, so to speak. So we have it in different fora, but I would say that the centers are providing information and support to the businesses directly.
Brilliant, thank you. I want to turn to you, Sarah. You, as you mentioned, you didn't attend the forum this year, but you followed it from afar, and it must be said that there's very much a world outside of the forum. But I'm interested in hearing your sightings. Are there any specific sort of crisis-related risks that you believe that companies should be paying closer attention to in 2026? We're at the end of this year now, but going into the next year, what are you seeing? What developments are you seeing?
Oh, it's a big question. And I mean, as you say, the forum, the formal events are one thing, and then the side events are another, and then all the conversations are another, and I got one layer of it. But of course, this is an area that we work in, and our conversations stretch across the year. I mean, I think one of the things that got picked up, and it's not the main thing, but it's interesting to consider how we react to AI and the fact that it is both an enabler for improved work, but it's also in and of itself a risk and creates negative impacts, and how we, if we go back to one of the themes that I was picking up, coordinate that, the management of that internally, because perhaps, and this depends on the company, the teams that are working with pushing out AI within products are not necessarily traditionally as close to where the sustainability teams are, and those relationships may need to be strengthened and built up. In tech companies, they should be there, but other companies, which, you know, every company is now bringing this into their work. So that isn't a sort of crisis. It could be an opportunity, but it's also one that has extreme risk attached. And that was something that was brought up a bit. You know, some companies talking about how they're using AI to absolutely effectivize and, in their view, improve their due diligence work, creating a much broader scope than would otherwise be available. And then the sort of slight, you know, you need to make sure that as you're doing that, you don't lose sight of the people that you're trying to help at the end of the day, and that also you don't create other problems by collecting all this data and not being responsible stewards of it. So I think that's an interesting one, and there's going to have to be a lot of work done to join that all up and find ways through. Yeah, it's one of many issues I could pick up on.
Yeah.
Can I add to that as well? Because I think, you know, any company, when you look across your kind of extended value chain in 2026, you're almost certain to find that you will have some climate related disruption or crises. Okay, so that's that's something that you can, you're not going to know exactly where that happens, but you can start to undertake, assessments of where that is more likely. Where are the physical effects of climate change going to have a more severe impact on, entities in your supply chain and the people that are connected to them, and take action on those. You're also likely to know, or if you do the analysis, you're going to know where are the biggest impacts on people coming from, your transition efforts as well. So I think it's attempting to kind of look at your business footprint and then anticipate some of these events, if not precisely knowing where these things are going to be more likely than less.
Mm, absolutely. And I think the point that you've all made about the data collection and what you said, Sarah, about the analysis paralysis and avoiding that and to really focusing on action. How would you say I can just tie it back to you, Sarah. The What would you say the role of the corporate culture or the leadership plays in sustaining human rights due diligence during difficult periods are when we're seeing these negative trends and we're doing the analysis, but how do we sustain the work in ensuring that it is made a top priority all the way?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's incredibly important that there's clarity of thought around what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it.
Mm.
And that can help to distinguish that action from the noise that Francis brought up. This is often described as the messy middle. We've got acceleration on some fronts, resistance, backlash on others. And then I think, again, picking back up on the theme of communication, and again, not just in terms of how you put that out into the world, although that's important too, because we have this whole idea of green hushing. And one of the comments that at a side event that I was able to join remotely was that the less you show, that you then that has a backward effect on the knowing part. If you're not showing it, students start to not even be listening and knowing it. So that is an important part, the external comms bit. But I mean just more in terms of making sure that the reason why you're doing something is clear internally. You're communicating sensibly between the teams that have to be involved, and that should hopefully try and keep on track some of the stuff that can start to get lost in what is this noisier period. And again, I think that there is real value in understanding what it is you have to do because it's a legal requirement, what it is that you want to do because there's an impact that you need to manage, regulation aside, and what it is that you want to do for other reasons. And that helps you to navigate conversations, because I think we have probably some of us feel maybe that we're like the boy who cried wolf with some of this legislation, and you've tried to get lots of traction by talking about a certain shape of legislation which hasn't quite come to pass, albeit there is going to be the CSDDD, there is the CSRD, it's just not the format that it came out Mark 1. So yeah, knowing what you have to do, packaging it the right way, and can hopefully keep people on track while it's so noisy out there. As Francis said, though, a lot of this stuff has this is a peak time, but there's crises always, and this is work. So
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. Francis, we have a question from the audience for you, and I'll read it out to you. This is quite a practical question. So, how do you practically influence suppliers in high-risk regions where the leverage is limited and local norms may conflict with Tetra Pak standards? So, navigating that in your internal.
Well, I mean, I gave in the example that I gave in the project in India, of course, we were teaming up with a very large consumer-facing company to build leverage with that recycler that we both used. So that's an option that is always open to companies. What I would say is that too few companies actually do that in practice. But it's certainly one avenue. We clearly, we obviously start from setting clear standards via supplier code of conduct, but increasingly also from contractual clauses with a number of suppliers as well on human rights standards. But I think it's really important to say that we don't really take the approach of sort of trying to pass off the responsibility in those challenging circumstances to suppliers. Like we very much go in if we've identified them as kind of in operating in a high risk context, to try and build capacity, to try and work in partnership with them. We'll often bring in expert organizations to work on, whether it's responsible recruitment practices or whatever the issue is that we're focusing in on. We will try and support them. So that's always our first effort. The other piece I would say is that we also do try and affect the enabling environment on specific issues, as we were talking about in terms of extended producer responsibility regulations, which I mentioned in my my presentation as well. So that kind of engagement with the policy environment, I think, should be part of due diligence in some of those contexts. But I also think it's being realistic, right? You can't go into one of these particularly challenging contexts and expect for a solution to be or the issue to be solved overnight. Like, I mean, you're going to obstruct your kind of long-term progress there if you try and move too fast. So I think it's being realistic about what can be achieved in the business context, and making progress towards the international human rights standard over time.
Absolutely. And we have as a follow-up to that, Francis, we have another question saying that, yes, your example about the waste pickers is a fantastic example of how companies can collectively work together to live and breathe the guiding principles. But what key message would you give to companies that are less inspired to act because they're more concerned about their corporate wallets? Is the question.
Well, I'd probably say firstly, in that particular example, I think there are, I've really struggled to think of many consumer-facing companies that are not connected to these issues in recycling and collection value chains. I think in terms of kind of the likely repercussions and costs of not acting, and a significant media or NGO report coming out are going to be higher than the frankly quite limited resources that are needed to develop a reasonable approach, particularly when working in partnership with others on some of these issues. So I don't think there is a huge financial cost to the company for this work.
Yeah. And that's something that because we have a diverse audience here representing many different companies of sizes and sectors. And I'm wondering, because Tetra Pak is obviously a large and advanced company with well-developed human rights due diligence structures, but are there any practical lessons or approaches from your work that you think that smaller companies or SMEs can apply even if they have more limited resources?
But firstly, I wouldn't position ourselves in that way particularly.
Okay.
I think we're very much learning, as many others are. We're also, important to remember that we are a B2B company and we're privately owned, so we haven't been exposed to many of the drivers that other companies have. And yet we do have this commitment, and we respond to customer expectations, because a lot of our customers are those large consumer-facing companies, and even I think small and medium-sized enterprises will be responsive to their customers' expectations if they are supported in the right way. And I think it's also worth remembering that the expectations are not for a small and medium-sized enterprise to have the same systems in place as as a large multinational company. It's working out what are the key risks and how you can proactively address those. That might just be having in place some fairly limited HR processes in some cases. It might be having someone on the factory floor that is trusted by others to come and talk to and raise issues. So it's if SMEs are feeling, and I think this is a lot of the pushback has around the kind of omnibus discussions has come from a rigid approach to due diligence, which doesn't reflect the international standards. So, all of these requests that are going out to small and medium-sized enterprises, that's not necessarily what due diligence means, right? It can be having a conversation with your partners and understanding how you can help. So, yeah, I think that's what I'd say there.
Thank you. I'm aware that that time is moving quickly. I will give each of our speakers a chance to give some final reflections and perhaps a key takeaway that for companies who are watching this, that of a concrete step that they could take to strengthen their human rights work if they've not already done so. And if the audience has any reflections or key takeaways, please feel free to share them in the chat as well. But I'll give the word to you, Ulrika, first.
Yeah, thank you. No, it has been really interesting, and we could continue discussing this for the full day, I think. I would agree with Francis, and I think starting with the due diligence, you in the SME, for example, you know the business yourself best. So start, looking into. I think this have been more or less said, but I think this is important to repeat. Start looking into your system. What do you have in place? Where do you see the risks? And don't see it as something that you cannot, as the Kilimanjaro mountain or something. Yeah, but just start doing it, and step by step you will have it in place. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah.
I can just carry on from what Ulrika is saying. Really, the main message, the analogy I was thinking of yesterday. When you have all this clean washing at the bottom of your stairs, you need to take it up, and you really want to get it up in one go. You can't face the idea of having to do 2 trips up those stairs, but you try and take it all in your arms, and you inevitably drop all the socks. Break it up, take 2 trips, do something small and build from there. You don't have to solve it all at once. I think sometimes you feel like you identify all these problems and you must solve them all, but that is really not how sort of projects are built. Manage it like a project. And I think maybe a just general thought is that the sort of operating environment that we're in just now, it will not be the one that we're necessarily in 2, 3, 4 years from now. So decisions that are being made now, just be careful not to overcorrect. That there should be some longer term thinking that should already now be infused in how you navigate. I can't tell the future. I don't know how long it will take for the pendulum to swing a different way, but that is the nature of things. So plan for that along the way. And I think maybe I'll just ask a question back, which was asked during one of the panels by someone from Shift, Mark Hodge. What does the next year need from us in this area? So I'll ask myself that question, and maybe you can all ask yourselves the same.
Thank you. That's a really good takeaway. Francis.
So, I guess, firstly, I just wanted to say that, the drivers for our work, right? They hang off our purpose to protect food, people, and planet, and we position human rights within the center of the people part of that purpose. Our customer expectations and the regulatory dynamics. And the regulatory dynamics are not limited to the CS3D. We already have plenty of regulation out there, even from the US. But also, the developments that are ongoing in Thailand and elsewhere. And in fact, the EU forced labor regulation that comes into play as well. So these kind of drivers for us, they all continue, right? And I think that's true for many companies. And then I would just double. I really think that we need to remember why you come into this work, and everyone will have been motivated in slightly different ways. But the purpose of due diligence is to drive better outcomes for the people most in need across your value chain. And I think it is, again, I would focus on them and the service that you can do for those people, and not get distracted by this noise. And then I think practically integrate in terms of kind of environmental and social considerations, because um, that really, it's often said, but I think it's less actually undertaken in companies, and there remains a real opportunity for human rights practitioners to take the work that their environmental colleagues have done, and to harness the progress that they've made.
Thank you all so much. I think those are brilliant final words. What I take with me from what you've said is definitely the importance of partnerships. Like you said, Sarah, the only way through is together. The importance of starting and remember who we're doing this for, as you've all said. I really want to give a big thank you to all of our speakers for your insights, and I want to thank everyone who's been watching for your participation and your questions. Before we end, I just want to highlight briefly our Business and Human Rights Accelerator, which we run at the Swedish network. This is open to registration for all member companies until Friday this week. This is a 6-month-long program to help companies advance and accelerate your work on human rights due diligence. We will share a follow-up email with you all. But if you would like to continue the conversation or get involved with Global Compact Network Sweden, you can explore our events and programs at globalcompact.se or reach out directly. We would also love your feedback. So if you please scan the QR code before you leave to let us know what you thought about today's webinar. This form will also pop up when you exit the webinar. So please take a moment to do that if you can. But thank you all again for joining us today, and we hope to see you soon.